This is day 13 of what you should know about Jesus. We're going to be looking at John 19, verse 28 through 30. And we're going to be looking at Jesus' death. And we're going to also be seeing that he was always in control of the whole situation. So let's go to John 19, and we're going to read all of the verses, 28 through 30. And it says like this: After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished, and bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Now this is the crucifixion. He is on the cross. He's crucified. And so right at the end he says these words, I thirst. And then he says, it is finished. These things had been written in the Old Testament about Jesus. Things that were going to happen. In the Old Testament, they wrote things that were going to happen, and now they had been happening. And the people had cried out about Jesus to crucify him. And it happened. As his mission was coming to an end, he was taken and led to die on the cross. Isaiah 53:7, which is found in the Old Testament, says that he was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. And we have to remember that in the old days, the Old Testament, people would offer a sheep as a sacrifice for the sins year after year, for forgiveness of sins year after year. So through the blood of those animals, God forgave them. But here we see that Jesus becomes the ultimate sacrifice. He is referred to a sheep, and now he has completed his mission. So he says, it is finished. There is nothing more to be done. There is nothing more to be added. Of course, the crucifixion, that process was not something easy for Jesus. Yes, he was 100% God, but he was also 100% man. The flogging with the sharp bones and that ripped off the skin off his back, the crown with huge thorns that pushed down on his head and cut open his forehead, the slaps, the spitting, the mockery, the loss of blood, the long nails that went through his hands, cutting up, his veins and sending him to have spasms as he was on that cross. The lack of oxygen, right, because of his lungs had filled up with water in them, and there was a mixture of blood and water in those lungs. And then when you think about it, that was some gruesome death. But also, that was supposed to be me. That was supposed to be you. For the sins, for the disobedience that we have done, and we have not followed, and we were not following God the way we should. And again, with Adam and Eve disobeying, this sin comes into the world. It comes upon everybody. But he does it. Jesus Christ does this sacrifice out of love, so that you wouldn't have to go through some sort of thing like that, so that I wouldn't have to go through it. He does it out of love. John 3:16, very famous verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. For whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And a lot of people think that the Jewish people were the ones who ultimately killed Jesus. Some people believe that it was the Romans because it was the Romans who crucified Jesus, and so the Romans killed Jesus. And although the Romans were there, literally crucifying him to that cross, they weren't really the ones that killed him. Throughout this whole process of the crucifixion, Jesus is alive. He goes through it, and he says those words, "It is finished." And then at the very end of that verse 30, he says, "And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit." He gave up his spirit. He was always in control. There was a plan to save you, a plan to save me. And it was only through the crucifixion, that shedding of blood, that gives us that forgiveness of sins, so that you and I can go to heaven with him. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. God bless.